Good morning, diners, and welcome to another Collapse Morning Wake-Up Call here on the Doomstead Diner. And this week has been another exciting week for our POTUS Donalditry Trumpovetsky. Donalditry is facing all sorts of charges and havoc to his operation, his racket that has managed to get him elected and into this position of fairly extraordinary power, and power that gets more extraordinary by the day as more and more constitutional protections and balance of power between the various departments or branches of the government are challenged. The so-called division of power, or something along those lines. Congress, the Supreme Court, the judicial system, and the executive branch are supposed to be relatively co-equal branches of government, and I know it's a system of checks and balances. That's what they taught me in high school, at any rate. And it doesn't seem those checks and balances are working too well anymore, if they ever did, which is a very good question. At any rate, what's going on with the clown-in-chief? Well, first of all, you've got that Mueller investigation. That's the one where they were supposedly looking into collusion with the Russians over fixing the 2016 presidential election, undermining Hillary Clinton, and eventually getting the Donald elected. So did they or didn't they? Well, it's pretty evident that the Russians did meddle in the election. But whether or not they were colluding with the Trump campaign, well, that's an open question. And so Trump's dictate or whatever, or response at the end of the Mueller investigation, and when the Attorney General puppet Barr said there was no collusion. It was no collusion, no collusion, no collusion was the mantra that you got in the MSM. And he pronounced himself victorious, and this is what the MSM reported. And, the thing was, well, there are a few things there, but first of all, the focus on this aspect, collusion with the Russians, was, kind of absurd. A very difficult thing to prove, and also, it's not really a crime, okay? Now, if you could, say it was treason or something like that, then you get to a crime level, but just, so-called collusion, that's not a crime. And, but, that's where all the focus was, and for a lot of months, but that isn't really where it's at as far as Trump is concerned, and in illegality and corruption. It's in other areas, most particularly his tax returns and his history as a businessman. Now, Trump has been stonewalling on producing his tax records. The IRS has them. New York State Tax has them. But the Congress of the United States can't get them. They have subpoenaed these records. The Attorney General and the IRS have refused to produce them. And Trump is now exercising executive privilege to maintain his secrecy over his financial dealings over, the past 20, 30 years of corruption and criminal activity that he has no doubt been involved in over that time. And so he's, he's keeping himself insulated, and nobody can check on him. And this is, totally against precedent. Just about all previous presidents, all of them as far as I know, but have produced their tax records on request for examination by the appropriate other agencies and, the American people. But Trump won't do that. You got to ask yourself, what the fuck is this guy hiding, right? He's got to be hiding something to be that vehement about not producing his records. And so, there is going on now a huge fight over getting these records, and the Attorney General has been censured by Congress. He's been declared in contempt of Congress, which in and of itself doesn't have a lot of teeth to it. It's more of a publicity stunt at the moment. In order to put some teeth behind it, they've got to actually have some prosecutorial power. And, there are avenues for that. One is to go through the judicial system, the federal courts. But, who's in control of the federal courts? The Attorney General, who's a sycophant and puppet of Trumpovetsky. So, that avenue doesn't seem to be a very good one to follow. Another alternative is that Congress themselves has the power to arrest Barr. They can send out their sergeant at arms and imprison this guy in the Washington, D.C. jail until he produces the records. But that one isn't too likely because the demodopes who are, spearheading this idea, they probably don't have the guts to do it. And it would put up a pretty interesting fight between the congressional cops and, the Secret Service and, the FBI and whoever else the executive branch can mobilize. It's cop versus cop here. And that would be entertaining, but it's not likely to happen. So, we're at a standstill, more or less, at the moment, with a lot of jawboning on the MSM about it. And one would think that it wouldn't do wonders for the popularity of El Trumpo, but, his constituency probably looks at it as though it's a quote-unquote witch hunt, which is what the Donald himself calls it, right? He's being persecuted, and, the Dems are after him, and so forth. So, he's like Captain Queeg in the Caine Mutiny, with the marbles in his hand, steel marbles. They fought me at every turn. I tried to reason with them. The strawberries! It was the strawberries. Well, whatever. Go see the movie. Humphrey Bogart did a great job in that movie. And I do a lousy Bogart. So, he's, got a certain amount of paranoia going, which goes along with his numerous other DSM-5 type conditions, as a narcissist and a megalomaniac and You could probably go through the list in the DSM-5 and find a dozen more things that he fits under. But, he's tweeting away in the middle of the night, and, we're continuing with the government by tweet here. And so, what's going to happen remains a mystery at this moment. Other than the fact that it's going to continue to percolate in the press and, maintain a certain amount of attention of the American people who actually spend some time watching the news, which is not too many, as the ratings decrease, and but you've got a significant number of people listening to Rush Limbaugh and so forth in their cars and getting harangued by that portion of the right-wing media. So that's just one aspect of his issues. The next one is the obstruction issue, which goes to both his taxes and the Russian collusion thing, which is at every step of the procedure here of trying to elucidate what is the truth, Trump puts up a new wall. And he's been really successful with this wall. He might not be doing so good down in Mexico with that wall, but this wall he is doing well with, at least so far. And in terms of stonewalling and keeping Congress or the American people from getting at what the truth actually is, rather than the varying degrees of spin you get from various websites, including our own here. I make no bones of the fact that I'm spinning my way with a drill bit into the clown in chief. I'm not a supporter of Donald Trump. So, when you view these videos and listen to the political analysis I do here, keep that in mind. Take it with a grain of salt. Do research elsewhere. I'm not the only guy out there with an opinion. Although I may be louder than others, and certainly dressed more bizarrely. But at any rate, so there's this stonewalling and this obstruction of justice, which is fairly obvious to anybody, at least with a clue. And there are a lot of people out there without a clue. So how much it's going to affect his ratings or his polling and his future in the 2020 elections, that's another open question. There's a lot of people out there who say that because the demodopes are so fractured and so out of touch with the electorate in many ways, that he's going to get elected no matter what the fuck he does. And it's like he said, I could go out and grab some woman's pussy on the street and it wouldn't make a difference. They'll still elect me. It might have been he could shoot somebody on the street. I can, not just pussy grab. That he's basically invulnerable. He considers himself untouchable, and that hopefully it's not the case. We'll see who turns up at the polls in November of 2020, and we have a long way to go between here and there, and that probably is the other main political stuff going on, the development of the election, and it's mostly, of course, on the Democratic side, because it's almost a foregone conclusion that Trumpovetsky is going to get the Republican nomination. So you've got a whole bevy of candidates, and Joe Biden, who's hasn't been accused yet of pussy grabbing, but apparently was a little bit too touchy-feely with a lot of women folk over the course of his career. So he's had some controversy over that, but he dropped in the race and turned out to be, the instant front runner by a big margin, according to the polls. And, that's all kind of suspicious. It appears to me that Uncle Joe is the choice of the Democratic establishment, and he's getting a lot of push from them. And then, everybody else at the moment seems to be distributed out. You've got Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders and Beto O'Rourke and Kamala Harris, who seem to be the most viable other candidates at the moment. And I might have forgot somebody there or whatever, but they each have a different kind of message and with a different focus. Bernie seems to be more focused on medical care and the Medicare problem, insurance for Americans with their health. Elizabeth Warren is focused mostly on the student loan problem, the huge amount of debt that is accrued there, and that, much like the subprime mortgages, threatens to blow up the economy, and probably will at some point. And then, Beto O'Rourke, who, because he comes from El Paso, Texas, right on the border with Mexico, he has a big presence, if you will, on the controversies of immigration. And Kamala Harris seems to have the most popularity amongst the women and minorities who the Democrats focus on quite a bit with social justice and that sort of business. So, which of these areas is the most important, which one of these people runs the best campaign, how they debate, who they get support from, what kind of questions are asked, how the whole election is spun. All of those things impact on it. We're not really going to know much until January rolls around and the primary, or I think that's when the primaries start, I'm not exactly sure. And we actually start to get some real results, not just the opinions of a lot of pundits in the MSN and the alternative media and on blogs like this one. I don't know what's going to happen. I do know that the fascist states of America government is rapidly decaying. It's not even a sham democracy anymore. The Constitution, such as it was, is violated on a daily basis, and you, me, the population at large doesn't have a lot of power over all this stuff. The people in power are a very few people with a lot of money who can buy votes in Congress and buy candidates and buy elections. And, that's the way it goes here. And, they talk about banana republics. Well, this is a banana republic now. That's all there is to it. And that's all the doom. This time, until next time, here on the Collapse Morning Wake-Up Call of the Doomstead Diner. Hasta la revoluzione, diners.